Here, with some brightness further south, we could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
The next Great British Giveaway winner could be you, with a massive £20,000 in tax-free cash to be won. Imagine how you'd react getting that winning call from us.
Oh my God, are you joking?
Not a line, what is it? I've never won a penny in my life.
I don't know what to say.
Do you know what? I've never won anything like this in my life.
Oh my God. Oh God. Oh, it shocks me.
This is amazing.
For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's Nursery. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, unlike you. That explains Beverly Turner's temperament.
It's a bit frosty in here, isn't it?
He'll have one of me one day.
Yeah, for dartball practice. Britain's Newsroom on GB News. Weekdays, 9:30 a.m.
GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, every Sunday at 9:30 when I'll be interviewing the key players in British politics and taking them to task. This report basically says that he's not fit to stand trial. With an upcoming election looming over Westminster, now is the time for clear, honest answers. I agree. And that's precisely what I'll get. Is he indecisive? Incompetent? That's the Camilla Tominey Show at 9:30 every Sunday on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's election channel.
We're GB News, and we come from a proud tradition of British journalism.
That's why I'm so excited to be here. It's something so new.
The first news channel to be launched in Britain in over 30 years.
Launched to represent the views of the British people.
To go where other broadcasters refuse to go.
How did you find out about the story in the first place?
Launched with one aim.
To be the fearless champion of Britain.
It's an absolutely fantastic atmosphere here.
This is GB News.
The People's Channel. GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope.
And I'm Gloria Di Piero, bringing you
PMQs live here on GB News.
Whenever Parliament is in session on a Wednesday at midday, we'll bring you live coverage of Prime Minister's questions. We'll be asking our viewers and listeners to submit the questions that they would like to put to the Prime Minister, and we'll put that to our panel of top politicians in our Westminster studio.
That's PMQs live here on GB News, Britain's election channel.
Hello, good evening. It's me, Jacob Rees-Mogg, on State of the Nation. Tonight, GB News is under attack. The broadcast regulator has found GB News to be in breach of the Broadcasting Code for the crime of allowing the British people to ask questions of the Prime Minister. It's time to remove some antiquated and censorious regulations. The Labour Party is set to double down on wokery as new reported plans suggest it will abolish the requirement for a panel of doctors to issue gender recognition certificates. Does it learn nothing from the Scottish nationalists? Does the United Kingdom, do you, owe Caribbean countries £205 billion in reparations for slavery? In my view, the answer is emphatically no, but this is what has been suggested by a senior Cambridge academic. Plus, Northamptonshire police have been accused of trampling over democracy amid allegations that a detective constable put pressure on a former local mayor to remove a democratically elected councillor for the crime of making posts to his amazingly large number of 76 Twitter followers. State of the Nation starts now. I'll also be joined by my most moggalicious panel this evening, the former Brexit Party MEP Annunziata Rees-Mogg and the author and broadcaster Amy Nicole Turner. As you know, as always, I want to hear from you. It's a crucial part of the programme. Email me, mailmog@gbnews.com. Now it's time for the News Bulletin with Aaron Armstrong.
Very good evening to you. I'm Aaron Armstrong. The Prime Minister has offered an unequivocal apology to victims of the infected blood scandal, describing it as a day of shame for the British state. The inquiry found a subtle, pervasive and chilling cover-up from those in positions of trust and power, including the deliberate destruction of documents by government officials. The final report concluded patients were knowingly exposed to unacceptable risks and the scandal could have largely been avoided. More than 30,000 people were infected with HIV and hepatitis C over more than 20 years because of contaminated blood products and transfusions.
This is a day of shame for the British state. Today's report shows a decades-long moral failure at the heart of our national life. From the National Health Service to the civil service, to ministers in successive governments, at every level, the people and institutions in which we place our trust failed in the most harrowing and devastating way. They failed the victims and their families, and they failed this country.
Well, inquiry chair Sir Brian Langstaff found victim suffering had been compounded by the slow pace of government compensation, and in waiting for the conclusion of the report, Rishi Sunak had perpetuated the injustice. Labour leader Sir Keir Starmer also apologised, saying victims had been failed by all parties, including his.
I acknowledge that this suffering was caused by wrongdoing, delay and systemic failure across the board, compounded by institutional defensiveness. And as Sir Brian Langstaff makes clear in his report, any apology today must be accompanied by action.
Details of the government's compensation package will be outlined tomorrow in a statement in the Commons. Victims say today's events are vindication of their suffering over decades.
Sometimes we felt like we were shouting into the wind during these 40 years. When we told people, they didn't believe us. They said this wouldn't happen in the UK. But today proves that it can happen in the UK, and it did happen in the UK. And I just feel validated and vindicated.
I think everybody today has read of the disasters that unfolded, and Sir Brian has been very thorough and has not minced his words.
This was systemic. This was by government, by civil servants and by healthcare professionals. I think that really rocks what we think of as society and really challenges the trust that we put in people to look after us, to do their best and protect us. None of that can we take for granted anymore.
The parents of a baby girl say they'll never forgive the callousness of a nursery worker who's been convicted of manslaughter. 37-year-old Kate Ruffley placed 9-month-old Genevieve Meehan face down on a beanbag for an hour and a half while working at Tiny Toes Nursery in Cheadle Hulme in May 2022. Colleagues and paramedics tried to revive the baby, but she was declared dead later that day. Ruffley's been remanded in custody and is due to be sentenced later this week. You can get more on all of our stories in our later bulletins, or there's more right now on our GB News alerts. Scan the QR code on your screen or go to the website. Now it's back to Jacob.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. On the 12th of February of this year, at exactly this time, GB News hosted an episode of the People's Forum with the Prime Minister and First Lord of the Treasury, Rishi Sunak, presented by our own Stephen Dixon. Because GB News is the People's channel, GB News created a new broadcasting format that put the people at the centre of the programme, with questions coming from members of the public and not from journalists. GB News hired an external and independent organisation to select the audience, which consisted of roughly 100 undecided voters. Neither GB News nor the Prime Minister knew what the questions were in advance. The programme's format gave complete freedom to the people to ask their questions. But apparently, the broadcast regulator, Ofcom, doesn't believe in putting voters at the heart of government scrutiny. Today, Ofcom released its decision that found GB News to be in breach of the Broadcasting Code and is now considering sanctioning GB News. Ofcom has made 3 basic claims for its decisions: that a wide range of views were not presented, that due impartiality was not preserved, and that there was a problem with the Prime Minister promoting policies in a period preceding a UK general election. For the first 2 points of a wide range of views not being heard and a lack of due impartiality, I can give you evidence here and now to debunk these points. Here's an example.
Robin White, I'm a barrister from Somerset. Why should LGBT people vote Conservative?
We've made changes in the NHS for provision of healthcare services for same-sex couples, and that gives, hopefully, you and everyone else a sense that look, this is a country whose values are reflected in our party and in government, and that is that it's a compassionate, tolerant place.
Forgive me slightly, but I think some of the issue may be less about the LGB and more about the T, Prime Minister. More about the trans issue.
Quite clearly, this was a left-wing criticism of government's stance on LGBT matters, and the presenter, Stephen Dixon, pushed it on the Prime Minister further. It was a clear occasion of a question being asked, an answer being given, and then pushed back onto the Prime Minister. He was also held to account on a range of other policies. Listen to this on Rwanda.
Why are you so adamant about Rwanda when public documentation shows it isn't working and that it's not going to work? So can you be open and honest with everybody today and tell us what the next steps are?
For the first time since the small boats thing became a phenomenon, the numbers were down. They weren't down by a little, they were down by over a third. That if you come to our country illegally, you won't get to stay. We want to be able to remove you, either to your home country if it's safe, like we've done with Albania, and for everyone else we need an alternative, and that's what Rwanda is about.
Prime Minister, I'm not meant to really interject with any questions, but I've got to say a lot of people will be wondering, how do you get this through Parliament? This is a big problem.
And here we had a questioner saying to the Prime Minister he wasn't being open and honest. If that's not challenge, I don't know what is. And here's another example on the question of social care.
Social care is chronically underfunded, and government has abdicated responsibility to local government, effectively making it a postcode lottery for many. Do you agree that it needs radical reform? And if so, what?
We announced an extra £600 million for local government across the country. And of that extra money that we've put in, the bulk of it is ring-fenced specifically for social care.
It's such a difficult issue which has faced so many governments, but do we ever seem to get an answer where we can really see any significant difference within a short timescale at least?
In each of these three instances, the questions challenged the Prime Minister, and Stephen Dixon interjected to further the challenge. And you must think Ofcom is like the deaf adder that charmed GB News ever so nicely. It stuffeth up its ears. But to address the bizarre claim about the Prime Minister promoting policies in a period preceding a UK general election, every point in English and then British history since the middle of the 13th century precedes a UK general election. And since the Fixed-Term Parliament Act was abolished, inevitably, you're always in a pre-election period. And that's been our normal state of affairs for hundreds of years. If the programme had been hosted 2 years ago or 3 years ago, it would still have been preceding a UK general election. And there's nothing in the broadcast code that says anything about preceding a UK general election other than when Parliament's been dissolved and we are in an official election period, which we were not during the programme and still are not now. We're not even in the Electoral Commission's pre-general election early spending period, which starts in July. So this decision is quite sinister. GB News was and has continued to be completely transparent about this broadcast structure that stays true to its values. But Ofcom seemingly only wants apparatchiks to ask the questions. This chilling decision gets to the heart of what the media ought to be. For decades, journalists seem to be on the side of the elite against the people, that they know what is best. But at GB News, we believe the people know what is best. Ofcom begs to differ. So GB News is the newest addition to the broadcast ecosystem, and it's doing quite well. This programme has reasonable figures, and most days we're a bit ahead of Sky, and sometimes ahead of the BBC too. And the establishment doesn't like this. Who could forget the time not too long ago when a journalist called for GB News to be taken off air on BBC Newsnight and went entirely unchallenged? There were Ofcom complaints about this, but we didn't hear anything about threats or sanctions.
You know, I have to say, I think the complaints have piled up against GB News. I think there is a delicate and important broadcast ecology in this country. I think you know, GB News is trying to bust that ecology, and frankly, what Ofcom should do is shut it down, like it shut down RT.
Speaking of the so-called delicate broadcast ecology that ought not to be disrupted, it's about time said that you, the public, own a broadcaster that poses as impartial news, but in reality pumps out left-wing propaganda. And for once, I'm not talking about Auntie, the BBC, which has its own problems. I'm referring to Channel 4 News. Hardly surprised that people like Adam Bolton, who it must be said has some degree of interest to declare, along with other establishment journalists, they would like us shut down. But for Ofcom to behave like this represents a threat to freedom of speech. It's about time its antiquated, nonsensical regulations were removed for privately funded broadcasters, not least because it can't seem to apply them fairly. It is a dark day for freedom of expression. It's time we had an equivalent to the United States First Amendment that protects freedom of speech from left-wing bureaucrats. I'd like to make it clear that both GB News and I wholeheartedly reject this ruling and will not back down on our foundational principle, whether Ofcom likes it or not. We are here to represent you, the British people. GB News is nowhere an easy target for the left, but we're not going anywhere. As ever, let me know your thoughts, mailmog@gbnews.com. I'm joined now by an old friend of the programme, journalist and author Michael Crick, and the director of the Free Speech Union and associate editor of The Spectator, Toby Young. Michael, you're not a fan of GB News, are you?
I'm not a fan of GB News in the sense that I think it is a right-wing propaganda channel. I think it's absurd that you're allowed to get away with ridiculous scenarios where you interview Nigel Farage, one senior right-wing politician interviewing another, or Richard Tice, or John Redwood, or Farage interviews Tice, or Farage's former press officer, another presenter, Patrick Christie's, interviews Farage, or Farage's wife. But you'd never get away with that on any other channel.
Nigel Farage's critique of the Conservative Party when I interviewed him last week was brutal.
Yes, but how often do you get two left-wingers interviewing each other on GB News? Once a year.
You can have that on Channel 4 most nights of the week.
Well,
you used to be on Channel 4.
You know my criticisms of Channel 4 News, and I made them for a long time, and I've given a lecture about all of this. So it's no secret that I felt that in the teens, Channel 4 News was biased to the left. Now, so I've got to be consistent here. And I think that it is absurd. I think basically GB News is taking the mickey out of Ofcom. Ofcom have become so weak, they feel I don't know what's going on at Ofcom. Frankly, the people running it are just not up to it. And they... but on this ruling, I think that it's a bit like Al Capone being prosecuted for tax evasion. I mean, that programme, it wasn't revolutionary. Granada did the Granada 500 programme, I think in 1964. Similar format, 500 voters interviewing a politician. Now, it was a dull programme, actually. Ofcom's right when they say that the programme should have allowed the members of the audience to follow up their questions in response to the Prime Minister's answer. They let Sunak ramble on for far too long. But offences were committed, but they're minor compared with what I've described. The way in which you allow politicians to interview the same party. And they're all right-wing politicians.
That's surely a matter of editorial judgment as to how long you allow a Prime Minister to respond. That you are asked pretty tough questions.
They weren't that tough. They were pretty... If I was Sunak, I would have been delighted with that. Now, of course, where it went wrong is that GB News thought that they might get a programme with Keir Starmer as well. And according to GB News executives talking to Ofcom, Starmer's people had given the indication that they would cooperate, but they hadn't actually said definitely they would do it. Now, if Starmer had then been subject to such a programme there, I really don't think that... But in the end, Labour basically have copped out.
OK, but you can't be held for that, because Boris Johnson wasn't interviewed by Andrew Neil. It didn't mean that... Andrew Neil couldn't.
No, but I think that the people knew in the 2019 election what an unprincipled character Johnson was and how he couldn't be trusted, and therefore they prepared for that eventuality.
You mustn't allow TV channels to be held to ransom by one person refusing to appear.
I agree. Right, but I mean, they could have changed the nature of the programme so that there was more criticism of Sunak than you've just portrayed.
This seems to me pretty fundamentally about freedom of speech, that you must be able to have a programme that questions the Prime Minister and decide what is suitable, and that Ofcom is applying its rules erratically, unfairly, and actually it just wanted a more left-wing programme.
Like most attacks on free speech, it underestimates the intelligence of the general public, the general viewing audience. Michael accuses GB News of being a right-wing propaganda channel. Actually, polling indicates that a majority of GB News viewers are going to vote Labour rather than for any other party. More viewers are going to vote Labour than for any other party. So if it is a right-wing propaganda channel, it's not doing a great job, or maybe members of the audience are intelligent and can make up their own minds. Michael's right that this format isn't entirely revolutionary. In 2005, the BBC put Blair in front of a studio audience that grilled him. No other senior politicians on that programme to talk about the Iraq war. In 2016, Michael Gove, when he famously said he thinks we've had enough of experts, he said that in a programme on Sky News in which it was just him being scrutinised by an audience. We have Call Keir on LBC. Where are the Ofcom complaints about those programmes? This feels like two-tier regulation, Ofcom's equivalent of two-tier policing.
Yes, I used to do a Call Rees-Mogg programme with Nick Ferrari, and that's absolutely right. It was only me and intermediated by Nick.
One of the complaints that Ofcom has upheld, and the rationale it's given for upholding the complaints, is, as you've discussed, that there wasn't enough scrutiny of Sunak's answers, that the presenter should have scrutinised what he said more, challenged what he said. But if he'd done that, there would have been less opportunity for members of the audience to ask questions. And one other point, the constant interruption of political leaders by journalists, particularly on the Today programme, but other programmes too, is what makes them virtually unlistenable and so unpopular as, for viewers. They don't want to hear or listen to senior politicians being constantly interrupted by journalists.
Michael, isn't what Ofcom's trying to do absurdly outdated? That there are now so many methods of people getting news, getting information, listening to podcast discussions, that trying to regulate this very narrow field oppressively will just persuade people to go on to other means of getting their message across that are going to be less reliable.
There may be some truth in what you say, that the world has changed and the range of media has changed and so on. But what's going on here is that Ofcom seems to have changed the rules without any proper public debate about it. I'm not aware of there ever being a proper debate in Parliament about this, that from now on you can have a channel stuffed with politicians of left or right, but only left or right, virtually, and that's OK. That's what Ofcom has essentially been saying so far. Or occasionally they've come out with a ruling, but they don't ever punish you.
But it is legally obliged to support freedom of speech.
Sorry?
It's legally obliged to support freedom of speech. And isn't it better to have GB News in a regulated sphere than we could simply go onto YouTube? And then we don't have to follow any of this
Well, I think if you went onto YouTube, you wouldn't get even the meagre advertising that you do get, and that's why you prefer to have the regulated, the licensed method.
People get quite good revenues from YouTube.
Well, in that case, maybe that's a choice for you to make. But what I'm saying is, when I worked in 40 years in the BBC and ITN, we lived in terror of Ofcom, and we would go and do election campaigns and all the Ofcom rules, and everybody got far more frightened than they should have done.
40 years, Ofcom didn't exist, and for almost all they didn't regulate the BBC.
The previous regulation, right. And now, if the rules are going to be changed, there needs to be a proper public debate about this. And as a Democrat and a parliamentarian, you surely agree with that. It's not up to a government agency, an agency of the state, to change the rules midstream and say, from now on, it's OK. And also, remember what they've also said is that they don't regulate GB News so heavily because your viewing figures aren't very high. And in which case, you better keep your viewing figures down, Jacob.
But I'm glad to say that Ofcom starts with the Broadcasting Standards Council as its sort of origin, which my father was the first chairman of, set up by Margaret Thatcher to stop sex and violence overwhelming our screens. Anyway, in a statement, Ofcom said, "We also took into account that, during the course of our investigation, GB News said it had purposefully not been aware of the questions which audience members would ask the Prime Minister. Given the very high compliance risk this programme presented, we found GB News' approach to compliance to be wholly insufficient and consider it could have and should have taken additional steps to mitigate these risks." Well, that's feral nonsense, I'm afraid, but thank you, Michael and Toby. Coming up, Labour is once again wielding the transgender broadsword as it looks to make gender recognition certificates easier to obtain.
This is GB News. Britain's news channel.
He's meeting his father, the King, for just the second time since his father's cancer diagnosis. Harry's going to an Invictus Games gig at St Paul's on Wednesday, and his father is hosting a garden party at Buckingham Palace. Once they're all said and done, about 7 p.m, they are going to meet, apparently.
Yeah,
but
wonderful.
crucially not the Princess of Wales.
Well, I think it's a wonderful story, and obviously you would. If you're visiting the country, you haven't seen your dad and he's ill with cancer, of course you'd go grab a Costa. I can't wait to see the pictures of them in Costa together, just having a little catch-up.
Do you know they might embrace?
I would hope so, but...
Do you know, I think it's really important that life's too short not to have a relationship with your family. I know too many people that aren't speaking, or they've fallen out because of money or whatever, and we're only on this earth for a very short time, and what a shame not to have a relationship with your own
haven't they?
son.
I mean, it's the trust issue that is really the problem here, and straight after this they're going to be heading off to Nigeria, and they're still involved in all of these sort of like commercial and media activities. If you don't have that trust there with your family, and you're responsible for breaking that trust down, it's not really, it's sort of on you, isn't it?
It's still mendable, though, I think, and we've all got people in our family that maybe we wouldn't trust with our bank details or something like that, so they can just not... You know, Charles shouldn't be going to Harry, guess what, you can't tell anyone. He's like, that's not what they're going to talk about, are they? They're not going to tell him anything.
The King is his father, but it's different, isn't it, if it's your brother, it's your sibling, whereas a father's probably perhaps more likely to be forgiving and to be wanting to sort of reunite. Do you think maybe it's going to be harder for him to mend that relationship with William and Catherine?
I think it's really, really hard. I mean, I can't see how they... But they need to get in a room together. They need to speak. The only way that you are going to break down barriers when it comes to relationships is by facing it and speaking about it.
You say life's too short, but some would say, well, that's a perfect reason not to tolerate any nonsense.
If you want your news to be straight-talking... This is a nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get their book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Neil Oliver, every Sunday night at 6 p.m. on GB News. And if an hour is not nearly enough for you, go to gbnews.com for special extended episodes online every Friday at 9 p.m, where we can truly get into the nitty-gritty of what's going on. GB News, Britain's news channel.
We're proud to be GB News, the People's Channel, and as you know, we always love to hear your views. Now, there's a new way of getting in touch with us at gbnews.com/yoursay. By commenting, you can be part of a live conversation and join our GB News community. You can even talk to me, Bev Turner, or any of the members of the GB News family.
Well, the mail mogs are on fiery form this evening. Absolute brilliant set that I've got. Brian says, the Ofcom statement sounds as if it's the one that they should have sent to the BBC Question Time programme prior to the Brexit referendum. And Patricia, I think this is glorious. I'm so sorry Michael's left. He's a very decent chap, but this is very funny. We, the viewers, are not so fond of the sound of Michael Crick's voice as he is. That's excellent. And Cynthia, today I joined as a member of GB News specifically because of Ofcom's ruling. Thank you, Cynthia, and thank you to our very loyal viewers. Nicola Sturgeon, do you remember her? She was the most effective politician in recent Scottish history. She secured repeated mandates from her electorate and for a long time seemed like she simply wasn't going away. That was all until she took the decision to try to pass the Scottish Gender Recognition Bill, which would have removed doctors from the process of changing gender. However, the bill led to her downfall. One might think that the Labour Party would learn from such a lesson, but it seems not. New plans from the party suggest it would abolish the need for a panel of doctors to approve someone's request for a gender recognition certificate. While the reform would still require one doctor's approval, it would certainly make obtaining the certificates significantly easier. Well, I'm joined now by my panel, former Brexit Party MEP and current sister, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner. Amy.
Jacob.
Doesn't the requirement to have a panel decide actually protect people who have a desire for a gender recognition certificate from all the fears that we've discussed before about men just dressing up as girls and using the girls' toilets?
Well, I love it when this argument comes up because we get to remember when it went through in Holyrood, and we get to remember that it had cross party support, and that it was
and then
actually
Alistair Jack stopped it.
Originally the
Thank
brainchild of Theresa May. So this is not a left-wing woke idea whatsoever.
All sorts of things have been the brainchild of Theresa May that we wouldn't necessarily support
This
here.
is a very sensible amendment to obtaining a gender recognition certificate, which is basically paperwork. It's things like your birth certificate, your marriage certificate, and your death certificate. And obtaining that more easily is just...
But isn't this a safeguard that protects people with your opinion? Because if you take the criticism of gender recognition certificates, it's the idea that a boy tomorrow morning can wake up and say, I'm a girl, and go make a nuisance of himself in the girls' changing rooms.
No, because he could go in the... This is nothing about changing rooms. This is
yes,
about...
this is, because once
about
people
birth
have...
certificates, death
that's
certificates,
right.
getting married
But it's about
with
accepting
dignity.
somebody as a different gender.
I don't think so. Only 2% of trans individuals in the UK even have a gender recognition certificate.
But
So that shows that it's very hard to get one and that people live
But if this makes
transgender
it
lives
easier,
without one.
If you make it easier, then all the abuses, the male prisoners who decide to be women because life's easier in a female prison,
I really think that...
all these concerns melt away if you've got proper checks.
No, the prison service is a separate argument because that's all done case-by-case basis. When you apply for a gender recognition certificate, you still have to have supporting material. You can't just say, hey, like that trivial example that you gave. But it's just that it's not as highly medicalised and it doesn't take as long and it's a more simple way so that people can get married and
it
become
might
a
not be
wife or a
highly
husband.
medicalised, but it's also not at all well thought through. That there are already numerous questions about what Annalise Dodds actually meant and how it would work in practice. That she says you'll only have to see one doctor. Well, you can't go straight to a specialist, so you have to go to a GP. So is the professional deciding, your general practitioner, rather than someone qualified in a relevant area? They also haven't begun to... They carry on in her statement with Labour Party as the party of equality while protecting single-sex spaces. Well, if without any surgery you can decide with the say-so of one doctor and not having to convince a panel or anyone else that you have changed your gender, you are then legally allowed into every single-sex space of the other gender.
But
there is no way to protect it. You are also legally allowed to fulfil all the quotas for equality for women, and that is not fair
We've
all.
had this conversation before, and you've said that you think there are men that are ambitious enough to want to have an F on their birth certificate and death certificate.
There definitely are in sports. And clearly in sports there are.
We've already seen
There are
it.
lots of men who have pretended to be women so they can win at sports.
I do not. I think there are lots of...
We've seen it.
There are transgender
It's been a
athletes
huge
who
amount.
may look gender non-conforming, but they're in the minority as
amount
well.
of this in
Because
America.
they're not the right
gender
if
for
you were right, the England women's football team would be all biological men. And it's not. This is not a problem.
No, but in most
women's
sports you can think of an example of someone who has done that.
Swimming and tennis
and darts and...
What, that there are transgender
Yes, who have different physical abilities.
But then they do as well as men, because they're basically men.
Absolutely not.
It's
So
true.
there was the case of Leah Thomas. She won the college swimming competition. She went back the next year. She came second. People only have a problem with
but how
transgender
far-
athletes when they win.
No, where did she come as a man?
I have no
5,000.
idea. I have no idea.
That's the thing. As a man, she was useless.
But
and then pretending to be a woman, she won. This is deeply unfair.
It's deeply unfair
It's
that you would
incredibly
say that
unfair
Leah
to
Thomas
women.
is pretending to be a woman.
I never thought of myself as a feminist, but I'm afraid this does make me very passionately feminist. That this is undermining all the fights that my gender has had for the last 50 years to correct the wrongs of hundreds of years. We fought for equality and we are now seeing it being lost by men taking our place in our own gender.
That is not in any way a threat to women in the same way that a patriarchy would be right now. I can't leave my house and feel safe. I can't go in my car and put my seatbelt on without knowing that it was designed for a man. If I take a paracetamol, that's designed for a man's body. Medical misogyny, real-life misogyny, sexism in the police. There are so many things facing women, and transgender inclusion does not even
It's
top
making
the list.
it worse.
Does not even get in the top 100 of my concerns.
It clearly is. And when you have bodies such as the City of London saying that men who are saying that at that time they are a woman count towards all the targets and quotas for bringing women into the city, that is doing down real women.
All right, well, I've given the last word to my sister, so like family life, really. But thank you to my panel. Coming up, how would you feel about paying more than £200 billion in reparations to Caribbean countries for slavery? Plus, has the Northamptonshire Rozzers taken a step too far by allegedly meddling in democracy?
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts, and quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result, cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible. And in the south, some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
I'm Arlene Foster on GB News, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Christopher Hope. This is GB News, Britain's election channel.
Weekdays on GB News. Wake up to breakfast every day from 6 a.m. Followed by Britain's newsroom at 9:30. At noon, it's Good Afternoon Britain. Followed by Martin Daubney from 3 p.m. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Well, we were talking about Labour's gender recognition, and the Mailmogs are forthright. Al says a person's sex is usually readily identifiable from a glance. Not always. And Roger, gender is a social construct. I think it's a grammatical one. If one were to be traditional, sex is a man or a woman, and gender is she goes, he goes. Never mind. It seems that gender is broadly misused. So, what did Black Lives Matter teach us? The Guardian asked today. Well, it taught us that they do not deserve a penny of the money that largely well-meaning people donated to it. In the US, some of the group's biggest benefactors were, in fact, friends and family of the group's founder, Patrice Cullors. In 2023, US tax filings revealed that Ms. Cullors' brother received $1.7 million in salary and contracts from BLM, while almost another $1 million was paid to a company owned by the father of her child. Cullors subsequently described the US tax form as triggering. That's great. If it's triggering, it means you can't do it, which is perhaps one explanation as to why only 33% of BLM's donations actually went to charitable causes. It was a similar story in the United Kingdom, where one of the people who organised the toppling of the statue of Colston in Bristol was jailed for using charity donations to fund a lavish lifestyle. I hope that wasn't too triggering. Financial impropriety aside, with racial relations at an all-time low and the Royal Air Force and others actively discriminating against white people, it has also taught us that organising politics around ethnicity is a quick way to turn these shores into a cold and windy Lebanon. This is a lesson that The Guardian has not yet learned, as today it ran a puff piece on the Muslim vote, an organisation openly encouraging ethno-religious voting. Cambridge University is also yet to get the memorandum, with the Dean at Trinity College recently releasing a book that claims the United Kingdom owes Caribbean nations £205 billion in reparations. This despite a recent Institute for Economic Affairs report that found slavery did not make us rich, and that Britain was the country that did more than any other to create a world where slavery is almost universally abhorred and outlawed. Well, my panel's still with me, my current sister, Annunziata Rees-Mogg, and the author and broadcaster, Amy Nicole-Turner. Annunziata, these people stole a lot of money, didn't they?
They did, and I found it both fascinating and tortuous reading Nasreen Malik's article about BLM today, that it was quite possibly one of the most bitter articles I've ever read, and I actually feel rather sorry for Ms Malik that she comes from such a miserable-sounding place. And the irony was that it's not, as we all knew in the first place, just about black equality, Black Lives Mattering, but politics. So one of her sentences was, "The bitter promotions of black and brown people to positions of power to scold us." And this was in reference to Sunak, and that having an ethnic minority prime minister is not good enough because he's a Tory. And the entire gist of her argument was that things are happening, they're heading in the right direction, there are things we can be pleased about, but nothing will ever be enough.
Well, I think one thing would be enough, would be, to eliminate racial disparities, which she says are very much persisting despite the efforts of BLM. And I think, yes, BLM individuals within BLM deserve criticism.
Well, they're a bunch of crooks who wanted to defund the police.
But don't use...
Did you take the knee? Did you take the knee, Amy?
I won't be doing it on air. Remember what happened last time when someone did that on air? Right, so... My point is, criticism of BLM should not take away from the aims or undermine the aims. The aims to end systemic racism, to address racial justice, and for equality. Those are noble aims.
But don't we believe in equality under the law? And that's a fundamental basic principle.
Amy, it's confusing equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And there is nothing that anyone can actually do to make outcomes more equal. And that is as true for women as it is for any ethnic minority. And in fact, if you look at ethnic minorities, the financial and educational outcomes are staggeringly different between different groups. And would you want to make everyone the same low level, which is the only way you could achieve it, to hold everyone back so that no one's falling behind, but no one can advance?
I think that conversations around things like the barriers to healthcare, the fact that 1 in 4 women who are black will struggle giving birth, who will die during childbirth, something they're 4 times more likely than white women to die during childbirth. That's a staggering statistic that we need to look at. That's a really clear disparity. Similarly, you see them across the criminal justice system, where there is great racial disparity. And I think things like the Lammy Review in 2017, it uncovered these and said, this is what we need to work on. So you can keep saying, oh, well, we ended slavery, but its legacy persists, and it didn't magic away the systemic injustice that built it and persists.
Pulling down statues is not going to change that.
No, and the piece pointed that out. But
and we know
you as
that white working class
can.
boys underperform almost everybody.
Yeah.
But why say white in front of that? It's actually that working class kids
and of the working.
No. But it's white working class boys that do particularly badly.
Yes, that's true, but it's mainly a social class problem. Obviously, all issues of racial disparity intersect with class. Yes, that's true, but that doesn't mean you should just put aside racial disparities.
Well, you just told me I had to. You said why said I put white in front of it, and now you're saying I should have put it in front of it.
You're putting white in front of it to try and say,
so as soon as you mention white, it's wrong. But if you mention any other race, it's fine.
Ignore the racial disparities and only focus on the social class. I am saying focus on both.
Because if you look at the social class, if you look at the working classes, of all working class people, the ones that do worst are white boys. But that is a very sad fact, and they happen to be white. There's nothing wrong with saying that, or that admitting and acknowledging that they are the worst off.
And it shows that this country may have some racism in it, but is not fundamentally racist. There may be racist individuals, but it's not structurally racist, and we should be very pleased with that.
I mean, think about the Casey review into the Met Police, which found institutional racism.
Well, there was a very good report that Boris Johnson commissioned that showed that that wasn't the case, that it was...
The Sewell report.
The Sewell report.
That was everybody's... That was
really distinguished report.
Widely criticised when it came out.
And we had also on the programme who explained it extremely well.
You've got Baroness Doreen Lawrence, Stephen Lawrence's mother, working with the Labour Party to try and make one of the first things a Labour government do to address this systemic racism that they're not burying their head in the sand about. And I fear that that's what you sometimes do.
Well, I think when you look at what has happened with this segregationist approach, you find in America that top universities actually discriminate against certain racial groups to promote others. Now, is it right to discriminate against Asian people, which is what they end up doing?
Yeah. No, it's not.
No,
right.
good. Amy and I have agreed. And I've got to move on. Thank you to my next panel. Thank you to my panel. Coming up next, have you ever criticised the Rozzers on social media? Well, beware, as Northamptonshire police arrested my next guest for doing exactly that. Allegedly. Plus, I'll be making a spirited defence of wigs, and that's without the H.
Friday night live with Mark Dolan from 8 p.m.
Well, we broke the internet last weekend with my suggestion that Harry should be staying at his old family home in central London. Take a listen. Harry will not be accommodated at Buckingham Palace, even though it's emptier than a branch of Wilko's. So, where is he going to stay? The Ritz? The Dorchester? Well, his media gigs are drying up, so he might have to go budget. He might like the Premier Inn, where he can bunk up with the face of that hotel chain, comedian Lenny Henry. What a laugh a minute those two would make. How about a Holiday Inn Express, where he can enjoy the wide-ranging choice offered by the vending machine if he gets peckish in the middle of the night. And I'm delighted to say that Britain's favourite pub chain, JD Wetherspoons, now have rooms available in some of their venues. The Hotel Wetherspoons, where you can check out any time you like, but you can't leave until you've drunk 12 pints of old speckled hen and got into a fight with an off-duty electrician. Well, Harry's blink-and-you'll-miss-it trip to the UK, in which he was snubbed by his father, who, let's not forget, is battling cancer, wouldn't have done much for the young prince's increasingly fragile self-esteem. Crumbs, it's almost like you reap what you sow. Well, in a shock new development, the Express newspaper report that Prince Harry was left in tears when his father bestowed a major new military honour on his brother William. The Prince of Wales is now the Colonel-in-Chief of the Army Air Corps. If he hadn't burnt his bridges, that is a gong that would have likely gone to Harry, who served himself with the Air Corps in Afghanistan. In the end, Harry's week can be summed up by this footage of a Boeing plane landing at Istanbul airport in a less than elegant manner.
If you want your news to be straight talking, this is the nightmare for the Conservatives again. Down to earth. It's not just Nottingham where this is happening, is it? And most importantly, honest. Hard-working, middle-class taxpayers, they'll get the book thrown at them. Then catch me, Martin Daubney, Monday to Friday, 3 till 6 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Patrick Christie's. This is GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And why it matters to you. From your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you. Good afternoon, Britain. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Nana Akua. This
is GB News, Britain's news channel.
Well, hello, I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation. Last September, the Conservative councillor for Wellingborough, Anthony Stevens, was arrested for an alleged hate crime after resharing a video on social media that criticised the police for their treatment of a Christian street preacher.
You will listen when you are dead. You will listen when you are dead. You will listen. Take me. No. Don't take my Bible away. Don't take my Bible away. Don't take my Bible.
Gave you the simple option. Well, a detective also reportedly telephoned the former mayor of Wellingborough to call for Mr Stevens to be removed as a councillor because of his views. With the Northamptonshire police now being accused of trampling over democracy, I'm joined by Anthony Stevens himself to give his side of the story. Anthony, first of all, thank you very much for coming in. So let's go through the whole thing. You joined Twitter, you'd been on it for a few months.
Yes.
And you retweeted something that was critical of the police.
Yes, retweeted it to Richie Sunak. It's basically saying that the point I was trying to get over is that we should all be treated the same. A Christian preacher, an Islamic preacher, they should both be allowed to preach, in my opinion. Yeah. But if you're not allowed to preach, then nobody should be allowed to preach. And that was all I was saying. I wasn't being hateful. I tweeted it to the Prime Minister to say, this is unjust.
OK, and you have 76 followers on Twitter.
At the time,
At the time. You've probably got thousands now. You've been in the papers a bit.
No.
So then the police bang on your door at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, it was actually August, but 8 o'clock in the morning, I'd just left my side gate open because I was waiting on a plumber. I just took myself in my gym. I was a bit late that morning. And then there was 2 policemen staring at me through the glass door. So I came out and they told me that I was under arrest for Section 19. I didn't even know what Section 19 was.
Nor would I. And you were taken to the police station?
Yes, taken to the police station. By the time we got there, they mugshotted and fingerprinted, and I was in the cells at around 9 o'clock. Interviewed around 12 o'clock, back in the cells for about 1 o'clock, and released at about 5:30.
So you were treated as a real villain?
Oh, through the interview, they literally thought I was... I wouldn't know how to explain it. It was.
You were treated worse than if you'd been a shoplifter?
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah, when they probably wouldn't have done anything very much. So that happens. Then the former mayor of Wellingborough is contacted. Now, what happened then?
Well, actually, I only found this out after all the conditions was dropped. I sent an email to all my fellow councillors to tell them what had happened and said, look, if anyone's got any information, because we need to look into this. The former mayor contacted me, and he said so it was the 8th of August I was arrested. On the 2nd of August, the DC in charge of the case contacted him to say that he needed to get me removed as a councillor. I'm paraphrasing because this was his statement.
OK, and you've been told this. The police haven't confirmed this.
Well, he's put a statement together which has gone to my lawyers and it's now gone over to the IAPC.
Did any charge come from your arrest, or they just dropped it?
It took them about 3 or 4 months. They delayed charge. In between all of this, I was due to come on GB News on Dan Wootton. I posted it on a Facebook page. The following morning, afternoon, there was a hand-delivered letter from the DI basically warning me off of the media that I needed to get ask for legal advice when they already knew that I had a legal team. So basically my free speech was not only trampled on, they then blocked me from... And then all the media stopped. I'd been on Mike Graham and a couple of other things. And then it had all completely stopped because the police had... So again, this is... The police not only arrested me from what I believe is my free right to... you can annoy people by your speech.
You can. I annoy people the whole time. I didn't intend to, but people get annoyed by lots of things I say. That's free speech.
Well, we don't have free speech anymore.
How did the former mayor respond when this was suggested to him?
He told them that they had no right. It wasn't in his power anyway, and they have no right. The Conservative could deselect me, but I could then. I'm an elected official. The Croydon ward elected me in a free and fair election. I have my right to. The police shouldn't be allowed. This is what I've come on for now. It's not the police's job to interfere, to subvert the political process for no reason. They hadn't even arrested me at the point when they asked for me to be removed. He said no. Then I went to my first play. I was bailed. My bail conditions was not to approach or speak to two people. I won't mention them. One of them was is a.
OK, don't mention them if you're not meant to mention them.
No, but he's a counsellor.
Right.
I asked my legal team, where do I stand?
Yeah.
And I'm the deputy chair of planning.
Right.
Jonathan had been quite ill a lot of the time, so I had stood in the chair quite a lot that year.
And you were able to carry on doing your council work?
Well, I went to the planning, and then the police then contacted Jonathan to say that he needed to stop me.
Yes.
He said no. They then said they'd raid the building to arrest me. He said you're not allowed. I'll actually stop you. This is what I was told.
Well, it sounds pretty serious. Although we're often disobliging about the police, I would say today I spoke to one of the police women on duty at the Palace of Westminster who had a bandage on her arm. She'd got this when off duty, trying to arrest and struggling with a shoplifter, and he didn't get away with either his telephone or any money. So well done to her, and that reminder, there are some first-class police around. Anyway, a Northamptonshire police spokesman said, this investigation is subject to a live complaint, and until the matter is concluded, we're unable to comment further. So I hope they will behave like this police lady on duty at the Palace of Westminster, who I think is inspirational. And finally, judges and barristers could soon lose their traditional courtroom wigs after Michael Etienne, a barrister with an afro hairdo and a fondness for retweeting pro-Hamas propaganda, branded them hair discrimination. Reluctance to defend, I thought that was primogenitor hair discrimination, no, never mind. Reluctance to defend our traditions and culture may mean that Mr. Etienne gets his wish and that we will soon see the judiciary in fancy dress or T-shirts. I'm sure that Mr. Etienne's complaints are entirely sincere and not at all motivated by a dislike of Britain, which is why I look forward to him taking his complaints to Ghana, Gambia, Sierra Leone, Jamaica, Kenya, Malawi and Nigeria, all majority black countries where courtroom wigs are very much still in fashion. Of course, I won't be holding my breath, so we may soon have a situation where English courtroom attire is worn almost everywhere, apart from England. Courtroom wigs do actually serve a purpose. They reinforce the authority of the judge and give an air of knowledge to the youngest barrister. They personify the loyal participants while sending a message that the law is not beholden to passing modern fashions, and for some, they conceal receding hairlines. Anyway, that's all from me. Up next is Patrick Christie's, and we're going to the weather, though I have to tell you the weather in Somerset will be brilliant, not least because we beat Kent by 8 wickets at the cricket today, which is very exciting. Well done to Somerset County Cricket Club, and I hope that the weather remains good for all Somerset's future engagements.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Evening, welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office here on GB News. A messy picture with the weather tomorrow. Most of us cloudier and cooler than today, but again, like today, there will be a few thunderstorms in place. We're between weather systems, but this area of low pressure is pushing up from the south and will generate a few more showers. We'll see the cloud thickening across East Anglia and the East Midlands with some showers here. The downpours we've seen across Northern Ireland, they will continue to fade through this evening, and many places will have a dry night. A bit misty and murky once more on these eastern coasts. Quite chilly across Scotland again. Temperatures down to about 3 to 5 degrees in rural spots, whereas in the south, many towns and cities staying in double figures. A cloudier day then on Tuesday, particularly over the Midlands, parts of northeast England and along the east coast of Scotland, especially Aberdeenshire up towards Orkney. Grey, misty and murky with that har sticking around, but a good part of Scotland actually starting sunny. Generally a dry start in Northern Ireland, but we are looking at some thunderstorms breaking out here later on. And we'll start with a lot of cloud over the Midlands, Northern England, and generally quite a drab day over central and eastern England. But some sunshine for Wales and southwest England. As the day goes on, increasing chance of again seeing some thunderstorms breaking out across Northern Ireland, but also southwestern parts of England. There's a Met Office warning in place. Wet weather will continue to affect parts of central and eastern England. A few scattered showers over the Highlands. Some brightness in western Scotland, but as I said, most places cloudier than today, and as a result cooler. More cloud and rain then spill in from the east as we head into Wednesday. Could be a very soggy day over parts of eastern England and parts of Scotland. Some heavy downpours possible, and in the south some brighter spells may well trigger some heavy showers as we go through the day. There'll be a bit more of a breeze coming in from the east, so a cool day here with some brightness further south. We could again get up to 20 Celsius. Bye for now.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
It's the biggest cash prize we've given away to date. An incredible £20,000 that you could use however you like. And because it's totally tax-free, every single penny will be in your bank account to do whatever you like with. £20,000 in tax-free cash really could be yours this summer. Hurry, you've got to be in it to win it. For another chance to win £20,000 in tax-free cash, text PRIZE to 63232. Text costs £2 plus one standard network rate message. Or post your name and number to GB05, PO Box 8690, Derby DE1 9TT. UK only. Entrance must be 18 or over. Lines close at 5 p.m. on the 31st of May. Full terms and privacy notice at gbnews.com/win. Please check the closing time if listening or watching on demand. Good luck.
GB News is Britain's election channel.
And when the big stories break, we're tackling them on Britain's Nursery. When we disagree, and we disagree a lot, it's even livelier than normal.
We don't disagree that much.
We do. His comedy, though, is revolting. I knew her, and